Hello everybody, I'm coming to you today from the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft. I'm acting in my capacity as volunteer docent here. My name is Wendy Adler, for those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of speaking with before. We're in the parking lot of the Craft Center, and if you are a good observer, you might come across these growths up in this tree that look a little funny. Upon closer examination, you would realize that those are actually a piece of art that were put in place by one of our former resident artists. We have several resident artists here that work at the Craft Center, people that you can ask questions of, where you can get maybe a closer examination of the kind of work they do. That's one of the things that makes our center so special. But having those up in the tree is a good introduction to our craft garden. I'm coming to you from outside of our craft garden here, primarily volunteer maintained, and the purpose of our garden is to grow materials that are customarily found in craft production. So what is craft exactly? For those of you that haven't sat through my lectures before, there are two primary ways to define craft. The first is by figuring out, how does a craft evolve? Well, generally it comes from a human need. We needed warmth and we needed clothing, and so we started to create quilts and things like that. We needed utensils and vessels in order to eat and carry things, so we started creating those kinds of things. So there's generally a human need involved. The other way that we can often define craft or fit something into a craft category is by the materials that are used in the making of it. So I've come up with an easy way to remember those categories. What categories do we use to create craft? Well, the easy way to remember would be Tom will gently pet my cat. If you can remember that sentence, then you should be able to recall the 6 categories of materials that we use in craft production. The T in Tom stands for textiles. Textiles definitely fall under the category of craft. Will is wood. So Tom will gently. The G would be glass. The P in pet would stand for paper. The M in my would stand for metal. And the C for cat would stand for clay or ceramics. So if you can recall Tom will gently pet my cat, it's an easy tool to remember whether something might fall under the craft categories of the fine arts umbrella. I now want to take you into our garden and highlight things that are blooming at this time of year. Of course, in a garden, things bloom at different times of year, so every time you visit our garden, there will be different things to see. But today I want to highlight the things that are in bloom on this beautiful spring day. Come with me. So when you first enter our garden, you look at this bed here. We have 3 plants I want to talk about. We have the yucca plant, we have the agave plant, and we have bamboo. I want to start with the yucca. The yucca almost looks like a little sister to the agave. Similar shaped leaves, much thinner leaves, and the yucca plant, for our purposes, would primarily be used for its fibers. So you might even be able to see there are a fair amount of strings kind of coming off of the leaves of the yucca plant. And those fibers are very, very strong. So they used to be used by Indians back in the day for sandals or hammocks or cordage. So they could braid those fibers into a very strong rope. All right. There are 40 to 50 different species of yucca, and it's not an uncommon plant to see in Texas gardens or throughout the Southwest. Next, we move over to our agave plant here. Again, it looks like maybe the big sister to the yucca. The leaves are much broader and larger. These leaves will also give you a skin rash. So if you're going to handle these leaves, you might want to do so with gloves. If you get in close, you can see that we have spikes on the leaves here. These little thorns can act as a needle. And when you pull those thorns off of the leaves, there is cordage or fiber attached to those needles. So it's almost like an all-in-one needle and thread. Indians used to use all parts of the agave plant. Nowadays, we know the agave mostly for the production of tequila, which we don't make here at the Craft Center, although that's a future opportunity, don't you think? Agave means illustrious in Greek, And the Indians actually thought, or the Aztecs actually thought, that agave stood for longevity. They probably thought that because it takes about 3 to 5 years for an agave plant to reach full maturity. So you would use this primarily for the ability to have a sharp needle-like instrument and have those fibers to bind things. Lastly, we go to our bamboo. Isn't this impressive? Look at how tall this is. We actually trimmed this back not that long ago, but bamboo has the ability to regenerate up to 3 feet a day. Remarkable, right? We know that panda bears love bamboo and eat it. We also know that bamboo is considered an ecologically sound building material. It's relatively strong. You can use it to build pretty much anything from flooring to furniture, paneling. But you can also use the pulp of the stem of the bamboo to make paper. Bamboo is not a tree. Bamboo is actually a grass, and it's got a very hollow, woody, pulpy stem that can be used in the production of paper. Now we're going to talk about dyes. So this isn't a great time of year for the plants that we would make dyes to be blooming, but we'll talk our way through some of them. At a different time of year, if you came in our garden, you might see the madder plant, M-A-D-D-E-R. And a madder plant would give us a very deep red concentrated color from the roots. We would have to crush the roots or boil the roots in order to get that color, but we would get the red from the roots of the madder plant. We also grow turmeric. You might be familiar with turmeric because it's the new nutritional supplement of choice that you might find at your vitamin store. It's thought to boost immunity systems, but it's also used as a dye to get a beautiful yellow-orange color, something a little more yellow than my blouse. We have coreopsis flowers here, and it's the flower that we would get the color from. It has bright yellow flowers, and if you picked a handful of those flowers and put them in a glass of water and let them sit overnight, you'd have a pale yellow color. But then as you concentrate out that yellow color, it becomes nice and bright. So the coreopsis flowers would give us a bright yellow. We also have a couple different kinds of berries that grow here. We have pigeonberry, which gives us a bright red, almost a holly berry color. But we also have pokeberry, and pokeberry looks almost like a blackberry color. They look like you should be able to eat them, but they're poisonous. And those would be used primarily for ink, so kind of a very dark purpley sort of color. The plant I want to talk about here, though, is indigo. Yes, indigo grows as a plant. Indigo, of course, is a blue color like my jeans. And this is what the indigo plant looks like. It grows very happily, and so we just had it all trimmed back, which is why I only have small examples here for you. But indigo was nicknamed blue gold 6,000 years ago when it was discovered. Blue gold because it was quite a process to be able to extract the dye. So how do we get the dye from the indigo plant? The dye actually comes from the leaves. It would take several tons of leaves to get just a gallon of dye, and it would take several gallons of dye just to get enough to dye one pair of jeans like what I'm wearing. So these days, indigo is not the primary use for the dye because it's too labor intensive to get a pure indigo dye. Oftentimes these days it would be mixed with synthetic chemicals and additives in order to get enough to make dye. But you would take the leaves. If I crush them in my hand, you can see there's nothing that would indicate it's a blue. So it would have to be reduced through a number of procedures in order to get the blue. But trust me when I tell you that the blue gold would come from the leaves of this plant. We're going to move on to cotton next. We have a section here in our craft garden that grows cotton. Cotton, of course, is widely produced and widely used for craft as well as textile production. What I didn't know was that not only has cotton been around for thousands and thousands of years, but cotton also grows in multiple different colors. Here in our craft garden, we grow several varieties, not just white like what we would expect to see, but we also grow brown cotton and green cotton. Now, none of those are blooming at the moment, although I did find some discarded cotton on the ground. and it just looks like a dirty cotton ball at the moment. It looks like if you took a cotton ball that you could buy at the store and it just happened to get dirty, that's what it would look like. And it still feels nice and soft. So cotton grows as a ball covered by a husk. The husk is actually called a boll, B-O-L-L. The husk is removed, and then the cotton, of course, can be spun into thread. But I wanted you to see that this is actually what a cotton plant would look like. We have lots of ladybugs that crawl around these plants. Those would be considered pollinators. Now we're going to go look at our pollinator section here in our garden. We chose a good time to visit our pollinators section. We have a beautiful butterfly doing exactly what we want him to do amongst these really pretty purple flowers. Our pollinator section, of course, is meant to attract the bees and the butterflies into our garden, because without those we wouldn't be able to continue to have blooms and growth. So in the pollinator section we have a lot of spring bloomers. We have St. John's wort, we have echinacea, we have coneflowers, we have prairie aster. We have a lot of flowers that are actually vitamin supplements. You might find some of these in your nutritional store. And that's not what we do with these flowers. We might use them in some craft workshops that we hold, but for the most part, the main purpose of this garden is to promote pollination. We also have a beehive located on the roof of our craft center that was put there about 3 years ago by the Bee2Bee Honey Collective. And while we didn't put the beehive up there for the sake of collecting honey, we definitely put it up there to make the bees and the butterflies feel like this was their home. We like having those bees and the butterflies. We also have lots of lizards running around, and if you're lucky and sharp-eyed, you might spot one during this tape. Now we're going to move on to our paper plants. We have several paper-making plants here in our garden. We have a banana plant, we have an umbrella sedge, and we have some rice paper plants, which we'll talk about last. Our banana plant here, it's not a tree. It's very large and it's got a big, thick, pulpy stalk, but it's actually just a plant. And you can actually see we have bananas growing in our tree. I didn't even notice that when I was mapping out this tour the first time. All parts of the banana plant are usable. So of course we have our fruit up here with the bananas that grow as fingers. At the bottom of that, we have this big flowery looking thing. I don't know whether it blooms before or after the fruit is ripe, but I thought it was so interesting to see how that extends down from our bunches of bananas. The leaves themselves would be the part that we could use as fiber to mix up with cotton fiber and make a more durable material. In our case, if we were going to use the banana plant, it would most likely be for paper, and we would get that from the pulp in the stalk. We also have umbrella sedge, and it's called that because the bracts or the petals that come out of the top look like an umbrella. There are many different varieties of sedge plant, and the leaves are kind of shaped like our yucca plant leaves were, but we would actually use the stalk to make paper. The sedge plant is a relative of papyrus, and we all learned, of course, in school that papyrus would have been what the Egyptians used to make paper. These days we would be inclined to use the sedge, which grows very happily in our environment. Now we're going to talk about rice paper. I am standing amongst the rice paper plants. However, for those of you that know what rice looks like when it grows, rice is actually a grass, and it's grown in paddies, and it would be very low to the ground. So why are these called rice paper plants? Well, in the late 1800s or late 19th century, Oriental art was starting to come over to Europe from Asia on ships during trade. The Europeans didn't know a whole lot about Chinese or Japanese culture, but they had these beautiful, colorful woodblock prints that were coming on an unusual paper. The paper was made from mulberry plants, but because the Europeans didn't know that, all they really knew was that rice was grown in China. They called it rice paper plants, and so that's how these plants got their name. Now if you look at how impressive the size of these leaves are. And we don't use the leaves in the making of the paper, sadly. If you look underneath, there's very little undergrowth. These gorgeous, huge leaves grow up and tall, but the stalk itself, which looks like a skinny tree trunk, is where we would get the pith to make the paper for the rice paper. Now we're going to go talk about basketry. Basketry is a craft that is definitely still being utilized today. It originated with Indians and slaves, and different regions of our world would use different sorts of reeds and grasses to make baskets. Here we grow quite a variety. While it's not blooming at the moment, we have pink mully grass, which has kind of a pink tinge to their very thin, long leaves. We grow vetiver, which is also used to make a fragrance. We grow fern. We grow devil's claw. Devil's claw looks like a small longhorn head, complete with horns and everything, and that can be used as an ornament on hats or on vases. We also used to have quite a lot of grapevine that was growing in an arbor over there, and grapevine baskets, of course, are very commonly found these days at craft stores. But the two I want to talk about that are currently blooming is our curly willow tree here and wild oats, wood oats. The wood oats, as you can see, are very prolific. We have them filling up this whole bed. So those would be an easy thing to grow and to use. You would dry them out and they would have long, skinny reeds in order to weave. Here with our curly willow, all of these branches are different looking from each other. They're very organic. They have a lot of curls and maybe a few knots in them. But wouldn't they make a beautiful one-of-a-kind basket if you use these to weave? Now we're going to talk about our fountain. So we're ending today's tour at a place that we normally would start our tours here in our garden. This is a great gathering place for school groups. It's a good spot for the kids to kind of release a little energy when they visit our craft center. This fountain is named for Rosemary Langdon. She was a prominent Houstonian with the nickname Bitsy, but that was all I could find out about her. If any of you happen to have known anything about Miss Langdon, I would love to get an email and find out why we have our lovely fountain named for her. The fountain is not operating at the moment, but of course it's nice to have a water feature in a garden and necessary to bring in birds and other creatures. And we have all these benches that have donors' names on them in various tiles and various colors. I'm so glad that you joined us for our garden tour today. The Houston Contemporary Craft Center is a wonderful place to bring your family. We have a lot of events and workshops, some of which take place outside. We have food trucks that come and adult beverages from time to time, but we welcome you to come and join us. It's always free. Donations are certainly welcome, but don't let any sort of cost prohibit you from enjoying art along with us. Thank you so much for joining me today. Stay safe and well, and I'll see you again soon.